She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just looked at the doctor and said, "Save my baby," like she already knew she wasn't going to make it out of that room. The waiting room of St. Callaway Regional Medical Center in Breckenridge, Colorado smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee. The kind of smell that made people feel like something serious was either happening or about to happen. Zenara Sue walked through those sliding glass doors at 11:42 in the morning, one hand pressing against her lower abdomen, the other gripping her small tote bag like it was the only solid thing left in the world. She was 32 weeks pregnant, not 36, not even 34. 32. The front desk nurse, a short woman named Della with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, looked up and immediately stood. She did not ask Zenara her name first. She looked at her face and just knew. "Honey, talk to me," Della said, already moving from behind the desk. "Something is wrong," Zenara said. Her voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that people only managed when they were holding everything together with the very last thread they had left. "It started this morning. The pain. It's not regular contractions, it's different." "Different how?" "Like something is burning," Zenara said, pressing her lips together for a second. From the inside, Della did not waste another second. She grabbed a wheelchair, helped Zenara sit, and was already calling back to labor and delivery before the wheels even started moving. Within 4 minutes, Zenara was in a hospital gown, connected to a fetal monitor, and being examined by Dr. Camille Frost, the on-call OB who had been at St. Callaway for 11 years and had seen almost everything. Almost. Dr. Frost was a tall woman, probably in her mid-40s, with short locks and steady hands. She did not panic easily, but something about Zenara's chart, the pattern of her pain, the way her vitals were already slightly off even though she had just arrived, made Dr. Frost go quiet in a way that her nurses recognized immediately. It meant she was thinking hard. "Have you eaten anything unusual today?" Dr. Frost asked, pressing gently around Zenara's midsection. Zenara winced. "Just the tea. Someone brought it to the house this morning." "Someone?" "My husband's assistant. She said it was an herbal blend. For stress." Zenara hesitated. "My husband travels a lot. She's been helpful." Dr. Frost glanced at the nurse beside her, a young man named Travis with careful eyes. He caught the look and made a small note. The next hour moved fast. Zenara's cervix was dilating. Too fast. Dangerously fast for 32 weeks. They gave her medication to slow the labor, but the contractions kept coming. The baby's heart rate dipped twice. The team was calm but moving with that specific kind of controlled urgency that hospital staff used when they did not want to scare the patient, but they were very scared themselves. "I want to call my husband," Zenara said between contractions. "Yensu. He needs to be here." Travis handed her the phone. She dialed. It rang 6 times. Went to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail again. She lay the phone against her chest and closed her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Then she handed it back to Travis and said quietly, "It's okay. Keep going." But Travis kept the number. He tried it himself from the desk phone 20 minutes later. Yensu Sue picked up on the second ring for Travis. "Hello. Sir, this is Travis Mullen calling from St. Callaway Regional Medical Center. Your wife, Zenara Sue, has been admitted. She's in active labor, and we need you here as soon as possible." There was a pause on the other end. A pause that lasted maybe 2 seconds too long. "I'll be there," Yensu said. His voice was flat. Not worried. Not jumping up. Just flat, like someone had told him his dry cleaning was ready. Travis hung up and stood at the desk for a second, staring at nothing, before going back to the room. Zenara was getting worse. Her blood pressure, which had been slightly elevated, suddenly spiked. Then dropped. Then spiked again. Dr. Frost ordered an emergency C-section. The room shifted into overdrive. Zenara reached out and grabbed Dr. Frost's wrist. "Save my baby," she said. Clear. Direct. No tears. Just a mother asking the only thing that mattered. Dr. Frost looked at her. "I'm going to do everything I can for both of you." "No," Zenara said. And there was something in her eyes right then, something that Dr. Frost would think about for years afterward. Like Zenara already knew something. Like she had accepted something that the rest of them had not yet reached. "Save my baby." The surgery happened fast. The baby, a girl, came into the world at 1:18 p.m., small and red and absolutely furious about it, crying the kind of cry that meant her lungs were working and she was a fighter. Travis, who had seen 100 deliveries, felt his throat tighten at the sound of it. But Zanara was bleeding. Too much. Her pressure crashed. The team worked. They did not stop. Dr. Frost called for everything available, every intervention, every option. For 9 full minutes, they fought for Zanara Sue. At 1:27 p.m., Dr. Camille Frost looked at the clock on the wall, then at the monitor, then at her team, one by one. "Time of death," she said quietly. 1:27 p.m. Nobody spoke. The baby was still crying in the warmer across the room. Small, perfect, alive, and her mother was gone. Sue arrived at St. Calloway at 1:55 p.m. He was not alone. He walked in with a woman named Priscilla Dane, tall, wearing an expensive coat that was absolutely inappropriate for a hospital, her hair done like she was going somewhere important. She was his executive assistant. She had been his executive assistant for 3 years. Everyone at his company, Atlas Strategic Group in Denver, knew what she actually was. Nobody said it out loud. Not to Sue. Della, the front desk nurse, watched them walk in together. Watched the way Priscilla touched Sue's arm like she belonged there. Watched the way Sue did not once look around the lobby the way a scared husband would. He was not scanning faces, not rushing. He walked to the desk with the careful pace of a man who had already decided how to feel about the news he was about to receive. Sue, he said to Della. "My wife." Della looked at him, then at Priscilla, then back at him. "I'll get Dr. Frost," she said. When Dr. Frost came to the family waiting area, Sue was already seated. Priscilla sat beside him, close. Too close. Dr. Frost introduced herself, sat across from them, and folded her hands. "Mr. Sue, I'm very sorry to tell you this." She said it directly, clearly. "Your wife passed away at 1:27 this afternoon. We did everything we could. She experienced catastrophic complications that we were not able to reverse." Sue nodded slowly. Nodded, like she had told him a meeting had been rescheduled. Priscilla made a sound, but it was not a crying sound. If anything, it was the sound a person made when they were trying to make a crying sound and not quite getting there. "And the baby?" Sue asked. "Your daughter is alive. She's premature. She'll need NICU care, but right now she is stable and doing remarkably well." Another nod. "Good. Just good." Dr. Frost watched him for a moment. She had delivered bad news to hundreds of people. She had seen all kinds of grief. Shock that looked like stillness. Numbness that looked like calm. She had seen people who could not process it yet, and she never judged that. But something about Sue sat wrong with her. The same way Zanara's description of the morning tea had sat wrong. The same way the abnormal pattern of her vitals had sat wrong. She excused herself politely and walked back to the clinical wing. Travis was waiting near her office door. "The blood work came back," he said. "Some of the panels are weird. I sent them to Dr. Ellison in toxicology because I didn't know what I was looking at." "Good," Dr. Frost said. Same word Sue had used. Completely different meaning. She went into her office, closed the door, and sat down at her desk. She pulled up Zanara's file and started going through everything from the beginning, slowly. The burning pain, the speed of the deterioration, the inconsistent response to intervention, the way her pressure had swung violently rather than dropping in the normal pattern of hemorrhage. She sat there a long time. Behind her office window, far down the hall, she could hear the soft, steady cry of a newborn baby who had no idea her mother was gone, who had no idea what she had been born into, who had no idea that the man who had just nodded at the news of her mother's death was already calculating what came next. Dr. Frost picked up her pen and wrote 3 words at the top of Zanara's chart. Suspected toxic exposure. 3 days before Zanara walked through those hospital doors, she had been sitting at the kitchen table of the house she and Sue shared in Cherry Hills Village, a quiet, money-soaked neighborhood south of Denver where the houses had gated driveways and the neighbors barely waved. The house was beautiful. 6 bedrooms, heated floors, a backyard with a koi pond that Zanara had picked out herself 2 years ago when things between her and Sue were still something worth holding on to. She had been making a grocery list. Simple things. Oat crackers, grape juice, the specific brand of prenatal vitamins her OB had recommended. She was 31 weeks and 4 days pregnant, and she had been trying, really trying, to keep things calm for the baby. She had a journal she wrote in every night. Not a digital one. A real one with a green cover and a little elastic strap that she kept on the nightstand. She had started it when she found out she was pregnant. Every entry started the same way, a note to her daughter. Because she had known from the beginning it was a girl. She did not know how. She just knew. Asterisk. Today you move twice when I play the song from the old radio. I think you have good taste already. I hope you get that from me. Asterisk. She had laughed writing that one. Those entries were the most honest version of Zenara that existed. More honest than anything she said out loud in that house. Because in that house, the truth was complicated. Sue had built Atlas Strategic Group from a consulting firm he had started at 28 with a business loan and 12 clients. By 35, he had 40 employees and a reputation in Denver's real estate investment world that made people return his calls on the first ring. By 40, when he married Zenara, he was worth more than most people in Cherry Hills Village, which was saying something. Zenara had come into the marriage with her own worth. Her father, a man named Desmond Callum, had died when she was 27 and left her a portfolio of properties across 4 states. Commercial buildings in Flagstaff, Arizona, 200 acres of land outside Billings, Montana, a historic hotel in Galveston, Texas that had been in the Callum family for 3 generations, and a trust account that made Sue's net worth look like a starting point rather than a destination. She had never made a big deal of it. That was just how she was. She drove a sensible car. She cooked her own meals. She planted her own garden. She carried her own groceries. But Sue had known from the beginning. Everyone in their circle had known. And somewhere along the way, knowing had turned into wanting. And wanting had turned into planning. And planning had brought Priscilla Dane through the front door of Atlas Strategic Group 3 years ago, with her sharp smile and her bottomless patience, and her willingness to be exactly whatever Sue needed her to be at any given moment. Priscilla was from Macon, Georgia originally, had moved to Colorado at 26, and had worked in corporate environments long enough to understand one thing very clearly. Powerful men were easiest to manage when they believed the idea was theirs. She never pushed Sue toward anything directly. She just made sure certain thoughts were always nearby, like furniture arranged, so that you always ended up in the same chair. The idea of the tea had been hers. She had spent 4 months finding the right person. Not someone local. Someone who would not be traced. She had driven to Albuquerque, New Mexico in September and come back with a small, sealed bottle of something that looked completely unremarkable. Dark glass. No label. She kept it in her office behind a row of binders. The compound inside was not something you could order online. It was the kind of thing that moved through very specific channels. The man she had gotten it from, she had never asked his name. He had not offered it. What he had told her, very precisely, was this. Given to a pregnant woman in the 3rd trimester, it would cause abdominal cramping that mimicked early labor. It would trigger a cascade of complications that would look, on a standard chart, like a rapid onset obstetric emergency. It was slow enough to make the timing impossible to pin down, fast enough to be effective. She had mixed a small amount into an herbal tea blend. Real herbs. The kind that actually smelled good. The kind a caring, thoughtful assistant might bring to a pregnant woman who had been stressed lately. She had delivered it herself. 3 days before the due date, she had privately calculated from overhearing Zenara's phone call with her OB 8 weeks earlier. She had stood at the front door of the Cherry Hills Village house with a small basket, a candle, a soft blanket, and the tea. "Just thought you could use something nice," she had said, smiling warm and wide. Sue mentioned you've been having a hard week. Zenara had looked at her for a moment. She had never fully trusted Priscilla. Not because she had proof of anything, just because some things lived in your stomach before they ever reached your brain. She had felt it around Priscilla from the very beginning. A kind of wrongness she could not point to directly. But she was tired and lonely, and the basket smelled wonderful. And she was 31 weeks pregnant and had not slept properly in 2 weeks because the baby was pressing against her ribs. She took the basket. "Thank you," she said quietly. Priscilla drove away smiling. The first cup of tea Zenara drank that evening. She sat in the sunroom with her journal, the koi pond outside catching the last of the October light, and she sipped the tea slowly. It tasted earthy, a little sweet. She wrote in her journal while she drank it. I keep thinking about how different things are from how I imagined them when I was a little girl. I used to think love was going to feel like the movies. Maybe it does for some people. For me, it feels more like learning to carry something. You learn to carry it, and you keep walking. But you're walking. I'm still walking. I'm still here. That night, she had a mild stomach ache. She blamed the crackers. The second cup was the next morning. By that afternoon, the burning had started. Not sharp, not sudden. It built slowly, like a fire that had been smoldering for hours before anyone noticed the smoke. By the time she went to bed that second night, she was pressing a warm cloth against her lower stomach and telling herself it was normal third trimester pressure. By the morning of the third day, she knew something was wrong. She called her OB's office. They were booked until Thursday. She was told to monitor her symptoms and call the after-hours line if contractions started. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. The pain was getting worse. Real contractions started around 10 in the morning. Not the Braxton Hicks she had been feeling for weeks. Different. Urgent. Her body doing something she had not told it to do. She called Yunsu. 6 rings. Voicemail. She did not call Priscilla. She packed her hospital bag herself, the one she had ready since week 28. She called a car service because she was not sure she could drive. She walked out of that house with her tote bag and her journal and her phone, and she did not look back at the koi pond or the garden or the 6-bedroom house with the heated floors. She just walked to the car and said, "St. Callaway Regional Medical Center, please." The driver, an older man named Garrett who had a pine tree air freshener and a radio playing softly, glanced in the rearview and said, "You okay, ma'am?" "No," she said honestly, "but I will be." Back at the hospital, in the present, Priscilla sat in the waiting room with a coffee she had not touched and her phone face down in her lap. Yunsu had stepped outside to make a call. She watched the door. Her heart was doing something she had not prepared for, not racing exactly, but loud. Like it was aware that she had stepped all the way over a line and could not step back. She had not planned for this version of it. She had planned for Zanara to go into early labor, deliver the baby under difficult circumstances, and then, in the chaos of a premature delivery, for the complications to be enough. She had planned for it to look like tragedy, which it did. She had not planned for a doctor like Dr. Camille Frost. She had not planned for a nurse like Travis who kept careful notes. She had not planned for the blood work. She did not know about the blood work yet. She picked up her coffee, put it back down, and looked at the ceiling of the St. Callaway waiting room. Around her, other people sat in their own versions of worry, a man with his hat in his hands, a teenage girl leaning against an older woman's shoulder, a father pacing near the window. Everyone in that room was there for someone they loved. Priscilla was there for herself. And somewhere down the hall, behind a door she could not see, a baby girl was breathing on her own for the very first time, with no mother to hold her, and a father who had nodded at the news like it was a rescheduled appointment. Before any of this, before the hospital and the tea and the quiet planning that Priscilla had been doing for months, there had been a time when Yunsu Su had genuinely loved Zanara, or something close to it. He had met her at a real estate gala in Colorado Springs, the kind of event where people wore clothes that cost more than most people's rent and talked about investments the way other people talked about the weather. Zanara had been standing near the window in a dark green dress, holding a glass of sparkling water, and not talking to anyone. Not because she was unfriendly, because she was watching. She was always watching first, thinking first, deciding whether something was worth her energy before she spent it. He had walked over and said something forgettable. She had responded with something she clearly had not rehearsed, honest and a little dry, and he had laughed before he meant to. They had talked for 2 hours straight, moved from the gala to a late-night diner 3 blocks away, the kind with a jukebox and laminated menus, and sat in a corner booth until midnight. She told him about her father's properties, not bragging, just explaining the weight of it. He told her about building Atlas from nothing. Neither of them was trying to impress the other, and somehow that was exactly what was impressive. He asked for her number. She gave it to him but said, "I don't return calls after 9 p.m. I'm serious about that." He called her at 8:58 the next night, and she answered laughing. They dated for 7 months. Real dating. Not the kind where you text from a distance and occasionally show up at nice restaurants. He drove 3 hours to Flagstaff once because she had mentioned offhand that one of her father's commercial buildings needed a new property manager and she was going to handle the interviews herself. He showed up with coffee and offered to sit in the waiting area while she worked, just to drive her home after. She thought that was the strangest and most wonderful thing anyone had ever done. They took a weekend trip to Bar Harbor, Maine in June, rented a small cottage near the water, spent 2 days walking the rocky coastline, eating lobster rolls from paper trays, playing a card game she had brought called Rummy 500 that he had never heard of. She beat him 4 times in a row. He accused her of making up the rules. She showed him the printed instruction card she had folded in her coat pocket. He bought her a small painted lighthouse figure from a gift shop. She still had it on her dresser the morning she left for the hospital. They went to Savannah, Georgia in August, walked through Forsyth Park in the heat, eating ice cream that melted faster than they could finish it. He took her to a tiny bookstore on a cobblestone street and told her to pick anything she wanted. She spent 40 minutes in there and came out with 4 books and a postcard she said she was going to frame. He carried the bag the whole day without being asked. She gave him a notebook she had found, leather-covered with his initials embossed in the corner. She said, "You told me you used to write things down before everything went digital. I think you should start again." He carried that notebook in his jacket pocket for 2 years. He proposed at the Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado Springs, back where it had all started in the same city, in the quietest possible way. No big production. No crowd. Just the 2 of them at dinner, and he slid a small ring box across the table and said, "I don't have a speech. I just don't want to do any of the good stuff without you." She opened it, said nothing for a moment. Then she looked at him and said, "You know I'm a lot. I have opinions about everything, and I will not pretend I don't." "I know," he said, "and I won't change how I manage my father's properties just because we're married. That's mine." "I know," he said again. "Okay then," she said, and she put the ring on. But something had shifted, slowly, quietly, the way rivers change course, not all at once, but bit by bit, until one day the water is somewhere completely different and you cannot remember exactly when it moved. Atlas Strategic Group started struggling 18 months into the marriage. Not collapsing, but struggling. 2 big clients pulled out. A real estate development deal in Boulder fell apart at the last stage and cost Yun-Soo more than he had publicly admitted. He became quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. He stopped writing in the notebook. He worked later. He came home to a house where Zenara had dinner ready and a genuine question about his day, and something about that started to feel like pressure to him instead of comfort. He had started letting Priscilla handle more. She was good at it. She was very good at making things easier. She was also very good at saying, in 100 indirect ways, that Zenara's independence was actually a problem. That a man in Yun-Soo's position needed full access to his household's resources to properly leverage his recovery. "The Callum portfolio," she said once, over takeout in his office at 9 p.m. when he was going over a cash flow problem, "is sitting there doing nothing connected. I mean, she manages it herself. It's not being optimized." He had told her that was Zenara's business, but he had kept thinking about it. The notebook stayed in his jacket pocket. The trip stopped. The late-night diner conversations became less frequent. When Zenara announced she was pregnant, she had hoped it would bring something back. A reset, a reason to remember what they had been to each other in that corner booth until midnight. Instead, Yun-Soo had nodded. Just nodded. Same way he would nod years later in a hospital waiting room. She had gone to her prenatal appointments alone. She had set up the nursery herself, painting it a soft yellow with small paper star decals she pressed onto the wall one afternoon while listening to an old playlist she had made in college. She had written in her journal every night. She had kept walking. The inheritance was enormous and specific. Desmond Callum's estate had been set up with the kind of legal precision that came from a man who had grown up with nothing and spent decades making sure his daughter would never know that feeling. The Callum Trust, managed out of a law firm in Houston, Texas, was structured so that upon Zenara's death, everything passed directly to her biological children. Not to a spouse, not to extended family, to her children. If she died without children, it went to a charitable land trust. Under no circumstances did it go to a spouse. Yun-Soo had known this. He had had his own lawyers review the trust document 18 months ago, quietly, without telling Zanara. The review had come back with one clear conclusion: as long as Zanara was alive, or as long as her children were alive and legally established as heirs, Yunsu Su had no claim to the Callum properties. Priscilla had been the one to suggest the obvious follow-up question. She had not said it directly. She had just let the silence sit there long enough for Yunsu to fill it himself. He had, and once he had thought it, he could not unthink it. That was the most awful part of it, if there was a part to rank. He was not a man who had started out cruel. He was a man who had allowed comfort to matter more than character, slowly, over time, until he was sitting in an attorney's office reviewing his wife's inheritance documents behind her back, and it felt almost reasonable. Priscilla had understood from the beginning that the baby complicated things. An heir changed everything. If Zanara delivered a healthy child, and that child was legally established, the trust locked down permanently. The only window, the only one, was during the pregnancy itself, before the birth, or close enough to it that the child did not survive either. That last part was something Priscilla had not said out loud. Not to Yunsu. She had just arranged for a dose that was strong enough. She had not told him that part. He had not asked. That was the arrangement they had made without ever making it. What neither of them had accounted for was a 32-week-old baby girl with an absolute refusal to not exist. She had come into the world early and small and furious, and she had cried the kind of cry that filled a room completely. The NICU team had taken her immediately, and she had gone to work breathing and stabilizing with a determination that made the nurses say things like, "This one is going to be a handful. I can already tell." She had not been given a name yet. Zanara had been planning to name her in the delivery room. She had had the name ready. She had written it in the journal 3 weeks ago. The journal was still in the tote bag, which was in the hospital room, which no one had gone through yet. Dr. Frost did not know any of this yet. She was in her office with a growing stack of notes and a phone call she was waiting on from Dr. Marcus Ellison in toxicology. Travis brought her a coffee without being asked. Set it on the desk. Said nothing. Went back out. She appreciated that. At 4:15 p.m., her phone rang. "Camille," said Dr. Ellison. He was a careful man, not alarmist. When he called something unusual, it was unusual. "I need you to come look at this in person." She was on her feet before he finished the sentence. The toxicology lab at St. Callaway was on the 2nd floor, past the elevators, and down a hallway that most visitors never had reason to find. Dr. Marcus Ellison was standing at his workstation when Dr. Frost walked in, and he turned around with the expression he reserved for things that surprised him, which was rare. "Talk to me," she said. He pulled up the panel on his screen and pointed. "These markers here, this combination. I've seen one case like this in my career, and that was during a federal consultation in Baltimore 2 years ago." She leaned in. "What am I looking at?" "A compound," he said slowly, "that was developed somewhere in the gap between pharmaceutical research and things that are significantly less regulated. It's not available commercially. It doesn't show up on standard tox screens, which is why Travis flagged the results as weird rather than catching it outright. I only recognized it because of that Baltimore case." She straightened up. "What does it do?" "In a pregnant woman," he said. "In the 3rd trimester specifically, it triggers acute uterine cramping. Mimics early labor. But underneath that, it's attacking the cardiovascular system. The pressure swings you documented. The hemorrhage pattern. That was not standard obstetric complication, Camille. That was a body fighting 2 things at once and losing." The room was quiet for a moment. "She was poisoned," Dr. Frost said. Not a question. "Yes," Dr. Ellison said. "And whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. This is not something you stumble across." Dr. Frost stood very still. She was thinking about Zanara's face in the operating room. The absolute clarity of it. "Save my baby." She was thinking about Yunsu Su nodding. She was thinking about Priscilla Dane in her expensive coat and the way she had been sitting too close. She was thinking about the herbal tea. "I need this documented fully," she said. "Every detail. Formal report. Already started," Ellison said. "And I need you to flag this to the hospital administrator and legal counsel before you do anything else. Nobody speaks to the family or anyone connected to the family about these results." "Not yet." He nodded. She walked back to her office faster than she had walked anywhere in a long time. She closed the door. She stood at her window for about 30 seconds, looking at the parking lot, at the ordinary cars and the ordinary sky and the absolutely extraordinary thing that had just happened inside this building. Then she picked up the phone and called someone she had not called in 2 years. Her brother-in-law, Detective Raymond Pruitt, who worked homicide out of the Denver Police Department. "Ray," she said when he answered, "I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to treat this as confidential until I tell you otherwise." "Camille," he said, already focused. He knew her voice. "Go ahead." While Dr. Frost was making that call, Yun-Soo was in the hospital parking lot on his phone. He had stepped outside to speak with someone his attorney had recommended, a man who specialized in estate transitions. He was already asking about timelines, about what documentation would be needed, about how quickly things could be moved once a death certificate was filed. He spoke in a low voice. Efficient. He did not sound like a man who had just lost his wife 3 hours ago. He sounded like a man clearing his schedule for a project. Priscilla was still in the waiting room. She had finally sipped the coffee, though it was cold by then. She was scrolling through her phone but not reading anything on it. Her mind was running through the plan the way she had rehearsed it. Zenara was gone, the baby had come early, and in the chaos of a complicated premature delivery, the expectation would be that the infant's survival was uncertain. Priscilla had anticipated a NICU stay that would give them time to work out the legal structure before anyone thought too carefully about who the child's guardian should be. What she had not anticipated was a baby who was doing remarkably well. The nurse who had passed through the waiting room an hour ago had said the words "stable" and "strong for her gestational age" in a tone that was almost cheerful. Priscilla had smiled at the news. She had to. Inside, she was recalculating. Travis Mullen had done something that afternoon that was technically outside his role as a floor nurse, but entirely within his character. After the toxicology call, after he overheard enough of the conversation near Dr. Frost's office to understand what was happening, he went quietly to the room where Zenara's belongings had been gathered. He went through the tote bag carefully, inventorying everything for the medical record as was standard procedure. He found the journal. Green cover. Elastic strap. He did not read it. He set it aside, separately from the other items, and made a note of it in the record. Then he went to the NICU floor and stood outside the window of the room where baby Sue was in her incubator, pink and small and frowning slightly in her sleep like she was already forming opinions about things. He stood there for a while. He did not know her name. Nobody did yet. But he looked at her through the glass and thought about the woman who had arrived at the front desk that morning pressing her hand against her abdomen. The woman who had been calm in a way that broke his heart. The woman who had looked at Dr. Frost with complete clarity and said the thing she needed to say most. "Save my baby." He thought about that. Then he went back to his desk and made sure every piece of documentation from the day was complete, precise, and time-stamped. Every note, every observation, every irregularity. Because Travis Mullen had grown up with a grandmother who always said the same thing. Asterisk, when you can't do the big thing, do the small thing exactly right. Asterisk, he did every small thing exactly right. By the following morning, 3 things had happened quietly and without announcement. First, Dr. Frost had spoken with St. Calloway's legal team and hospital administrator. The toxicology report had been formally completed and a copy sent to Detective Raymond Pruitt's department. A parallel request had been submitted to the Colorado Department of Health through proper medical reporting channels. Everything was documented. Everything was moving through the right systems. Second, Dr. Frost had reviewed Zenara's emergency contact file and found, listed below Yun-Soo's number, a secondary contact, Margot Callum Reed's sister. A note beside the name said, Asterisk, call her if anything goes wrong. She'll know what to do. Asterisk, Dr. Frost called Margot Callum Reed at 6 in the morning. Margot lived in Tucson, Arizona. She answered on the first ring, which meant she had either been awake already or she slept like someone expecting bad news. When she heard Dr. Frost's voice, she was quiet for a very long moment. Then she said, "How's the baby?" "Alive," Dr. Frost said. "Stable. Fighting." "That's Zenara's daughter already," Margot said, and her voice broke just at the edge of it but held. "I'm getting on a plane." "There's more you need to know," Dr. Frost said. She told her. The silence on the other end of the line was different from Yunsu's silence. It was not flat. It was heavy. The kind of silence that comes before something very determined. "Don't let him near that baby," Margot said quietly. "I need you to understand the legal position." "I understand it," Margot said. "Zenara told me about the trust. She told me 6 months ago that something felt wrong. She couldn't name it, but she wanted me to know where the documents were. She gave me a copy of the trust agreement and the name of the Houston attorney. She said, just in case." Dr. Frost closed her eyes. Zenara had known. Not the specifics, but something. That thing in her stomach that she had felt around Priscilla from the beginning. She had felt it long enough to make a plan she hoped she would never need. She had put it in place anyway, quietly, while she was painting the nursery yellow and pressing paper stars on the wall. "Get here as soon as you can," Dr. Frost said, "and call the Houston attorney on the way." Third, and most important, a woman named Dr. Camille Frost filed an emergency petition through St. Callaway's legal office and the Colorado courts for a temporary medical guardianship of the infant, citing active law enforcement investigation and credible risk to the child's well-being. It was not a permanent arrangement. It was not even an unusual one in cases where a parent's death involved potential criminal circumstances. But it was enough. It meant that Yunsu Su could not walk into that NICU and make decisions about his daughter's care or legal status until the investigation was further along. It meant that nothing moved without court oversight. It meant that the Callum Trust, the Flagstaff buildings, and the Montana land and the Galveston Hotel stayed exactly where it was. Frozen. Yunsu found out at 9 a.m. when he came back to the hospital with Priscilla and an attorney of his own. He was told, politely but firmly, by the hospital administrator that he would need to work through the court process regarding his daughter, that there was an ongoing review, that he should speak with his attorney. He stood in the corridor of St. Callaway Regional Medical Center with his jaw tight and his eyes doing something complicated. Priscilla stood beside him and said nothing for once. Down the hall, the baby was asleep in her incubator, growing stronger by the hour. Margot Callum Reed landed in Denver at 2 in the afternoon. She was 51 years old, with short natural hair going silver at the temples and the kind of presence that made people step back slightly without knowing why. She wore flat shoes and a practical coat and walked through the airport like someone who had a destination and a purpose. She went straight to St. Callaway. Dr. Frost met her in person for the first time, and they shook hands with the specific gravity of 2 women who understood that they were now responsible for something that mattered enormously. Margot went to the NICU. The nurse on duty, a kind woman named Charisse, helped her get suited up properly and brought her in. She stood at the incubator for a long time. The baby was small, impossibly small, but her color was good and her chest rose and fell with a steadiness that was almost defiant. There was something about the set of her tiny face, even in sleep, that was so completely Zenara that Margot had to put her hand over her mouth for a moment. "She doesn't have a name yet," Charisse said gently. "She does," Margot said. "I just have to find it." She reached into the bag she had carried from Tucson and took out a small envelope. Inside was a piece of paper that Zenara had given her 6 months ago, folded twice. On it was a name. Zenara had written, asterisk if it's a girl, which I know it is. Asterisk. The name on the paper was Soline. Soline Sue. Margot held the paper for a long time. Then she folded it again and put it back in the envelope and said quietly, to the baby, not to Charisse, "Your name is Soline. Your mama picked it for you." She had very good taste. She stayed in that room for 2 hours. The investigation moved the way good investigations move when the right people are involved. Carefully, thoroughly, without announcement. Detective Pruitt brought in a federal contact because of the specific nature of the compound identified by Dr. Ellison. The compound's origins led back, through a long chain of people and transactions, to a supplier who had been on a federal watch list for 3 years. A supplier connected to organized distribution networks operating across New Mexico and southern Colorado. The man Priscilla had met in Albuquerque, whose name, it turned out, was not as unknown as she had assumed. His name, she had told herself she did not need. He had remembered her, though. People like him always remembered. And when federal investigators showed him a photograph, he identified Priscilla Dane without hesitation. He had no loyalty to her. She was a transaction. Priscilla's Albuquerque trip records, her hotel stay, her car rental, her phone data, all of it had a timestamp. All of it corroborated. It took 6 weeks. 6 weeks from the morning Zenara walked into St. Calloway's lobby to the morning that federal agents knocked on Priscilla Dane's apartment door in Denver. She opened it in a robe with her hair undone and her eyes moving quickly between the badges and the faces, doing that same thing she always did, calculating, recalculating, looking for the angle. There was no angle. Yunsu was brought in for questioning the same morning. He sat across a table from Detective Pruitt and 2 federal agents and answered questions with a lawyer beside him. He was careful. He was precise. He admitted to reviewing the trust documents. He denied knowing about the compound. He denied knowing Priscilla had gone to Albuquerque. He said these things clearly and calmly. Nobody in that room believed him. Proving what you believe and proving what happened are 2 different things. But the investigation was not finished. And Priscilla, who had spent 3 years managing a man who believed the idea was always his, sat in her own interrogation room and understood very clearly that Yunsu would let her carry everything alone if he could. That had always been the plan. Just not her plan. She asked for a deal. What came after was not fast. Nothing real ever is. There were legal proceedings. There were court hearings about Soline's custody and guardianship. There were weeks of NICU visits. Soline growing slowly and steadily toward the size she was supposed to have been born at. Margot flew back to Tucson once to get more clothes in her car, drove back up to Denver, and rented a small apartment near the hospital. She brought the journal. She read it, finally all the way through. She sat in the apartment in Denver with a cup of tea she had made herself, and she read every single entry from beginning to end. She cried at some of them. She laughed at some of them. She pressed her hand over a page near the end, the last complete entry, written 2 days before everything happened. I don't know what's coming. I keep feeling like something is changing, and I can't see the shape of it yet. But I know my daughter is strong. I know that because she's mine. And whatever comes, she's going to be somebody's whole world. Probably mine. But even if I can't be there for every moment, I hope somebody who loves her is. I hope she never feels alone. I hope she always knows her mother was walking. Right until the end. Still walking. Margot closed the journal and held it against her chest for a long time. On the day Soline Sue was discharged from St. Calloway Regional Medical Center, 8 weeks after she had arrived in the world early and furious and absolutely determined, it was a Tuesday in December. Cold outside. The mountains around Denver were white with early snow. Margot carried her out. Dr. Frost was there. Travis was there, still in his scrubs from his shift, standing near the door with his hands in his pockets. Della from the front desk had specifically taken a later break so she could be in the lobby when they came through. Cherise from the NICU had signed Soline's discharge chart herself. Soline was dressed in a tiny yellow outfit because Margot had gone to the nursery in Cherry Hills Village once, carefully with a court order, and brought back the things Zenara had prepared. The yellow paint, the star decals, the soft blankets folded in the drawer, the painted lighthouse figure from Bar Harbor that had been on the dresser. She brought all of it back to Tucson eventually, set the nursery up again, star by star. Soline came home to yellow walls. The legal case against Priscilla Dane resulted in a conviction that carried a sentence heavy enough to be measured in decades. Yunsu Su, after 8 months of investigation and a very determined federal prosecutor, was charged as a co-conspirator. His attorney worked hard. The outcome was still substantial. The Callum Trust remained intact. The Flagstaff buildings, the Montana land, the Galveston Hotel, all of it locked in place exactly as Desmond Callum had set it up, passing now into trust for Soline, managed carefully until she was old enough to understand what her grandfather had built and what her mother had protected with every quiet, determined step she had taken. Dr. Frost requested a small update every year from Margot. She got one. Always a photo. Soline at 6 months, at 1 year, at 2, growing into a girl with bright eyes and an extremely strong opinion about what she wanted to eat for breakfast. At 3 years old, Soline walked into Margot's kitchen, pointed at the painted lighthouse figure on the windowsill, and asked what it was. Margot sat down on the kitchen floor right there, so they were at the same height. She picked up the little lighthouse and held it so Soline could see it properly. "Your mama got that on a trip," she said. She went to a place near the ocean up north, and she found it in a little shop. She thought it was beautiful. Soline looked at it very seriously. Where's my mama? Margot had been waiting for that question. Had been thinking about how to answer it for 3 years. She had talked to people about it, read things about it, thought about it late at night. She said, "She's not here the way I'm here. But she was here very much. She wanted you more than anything. She made sure you were safe before she left. That's how much she loved you." Soline considered this. Then she reached out and took the lighthouse from Margot's hand and held it carefully, the way small children hold things they understand matter. "Can I keep it?" she asked. "It's already yours," Margot said. "It was always yours. If this story stayed with you the way it stayed with me writing it, share it with someone who needs to believe that love doesn't disappear just because a person does. Subscribe to this channel because there are more stories like this one coming, and trust me, you do not want to miss what's next. Drop in the comments, what part hit you the hardest?